With that said, let's meet our guest this morning. His name is Dennis Nthumbi. He's a political risk advisor. It's been a minute since he's been on the show. Karibu sana.
Thank you so much for having me.
You're most welcome. You're looking sharp, I have to say.
Thank you. You're looking sharper.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you. I appreciate it.
Yes.
Man, we have a lot to discuss as far as politics is concerned,
Yes.
but also just looking at some of the events of the weekend, of course. COVID, you have a very extensive background as well in security studies and analysis. And I mean, I just kind of want to hear from your perspective. As you see the numbers, I mean, yesterday we were talking about 471, I think. That's in a day. The numbers are getting scarier and scarier. And I think there was a period hapo katikati where we had kind of just begun to feel filanga free almost with this thing, but you can almost sense the nervousness rising up again. How prepared are we really, you know, as far as being able to manage this if these numbers begin to blow up exponentially?
Wow. COVID has been, of course, I think the conversation of the day. And if we look at, several things. First of all, there was the first issue, which was government response. How did they respond to the pandemic once the news broke out? What measures did they take in place, and how did they build their capacity? And then after capacity, how did they then deal with the issue? And I think technically what we saw is that the response wasn't very good because it took a while. And what it is that we did is that we technically allowed the export, the import of COVID, if you like. Our borders were not closed on time. And therefore...
When would you have said they should have been closed?
I think immediately, you see, COVID played out, in the back end of 2019.
Yeah.
And I think then Kemri and other experts would have had the opportunity to do an analysis, a risk analysis, on the extensity of this, and even the pronouncement by WHO that this then has then the proportion to become a pandemic. Already we should have gone into a certain risk matrix to say if this thing enters in Kenya, then what is our capacity building? But also it shows that the government was reactive in its response. It wasn't proactive. It means that we did not have tools in place to deal with any sort of calamity, with any sort of induced calamity, because what it is that we are looking at COVID, we're not looking at it from a natural perspective. We are looking at it from an induced perspective. The fact that somebody might have gone to a lab somewhere and created something of this nature and proportion. So the reaction or the response was reactive based, and hence we did not have any standby tools, even though the very fact that healthcare is one of the pillars of the president and sits within the presidency, and we have fed it billions consistently.
Well, it's interesting you say that,
for several years.
You've not heard anything about that particular pillar for a very long time. And I appreciate you saying that indeed our response has been very reactive. There's a lot of people who've praised us and said, we've tried to do well and whatnot. But I think the issue is, outside of these sort of low-hanging fruit, there's sort of not much beyond that, really. Even as far as this simple hospital capacity. In the beginning, we saw people sleeping on floors in hospital. And then last week, we're seeing how governors have ICU beds in their houses, while Kenyans don't have access to medical care.
Unfortunately. I think if you look at the issue of access to medical care, you need to ask yourself, what is the issue? Because we don't have shortage of hospitals. But possibly it will be the issue of affordability. Even though you have a very elaborate policy and one of the most aggressive policies that there are in Africa, within the universal healthcare that the president launched, and one of the most funded, by the way, but also one of the most corrupt, still under the presidency. So other than the fact that our response was very poor, perhaps sometimes driven by business interests, international interests that we may aggrieve partners who are trying to fly in and whatever it is that when we look at our capacity really, to provide for accessible, safe and healthcare that provides dignity to our people, it's absolutely absent. And I think COVID came to expose, some of those things. And also the very nature that even though they put a kitty and they put the response together, it was still hoarded within the central government. We saw that close to 70 days after COVID and after the protocols were put in place, the president was on record on TV saying that there's no capacity within the counties. Then you'd want to ask yourself, what exactly have you been doing for those very many times? Now we're trying to see them buying ICU beds, many months into a crisis that should have been taken care of a long time ago. And you'd want to ask ourselves, exactly, doesn't the government have prudent advisors who are pretty well paid? We have international, very serious international organizations domiciled in the country like CDC. Our KEMRI, facilities have been used to fight the likes of Ebola and all. So sometimes this is not an issue of COVID. This is truly an issue of poor leadership that is not centric to its people, that is not sensitive to the needs and the desires of their people. Which
is why it's also sort of a slap in the face when you see guys flying out on private jets to go get treatment when someone can't go next door.
Absolutely. You've said something very critical, that governors really have installed ICU wards. They have taken one of the bedrooms and transformed it, not because they are sick. If they fall sick, they know that there's no such capacity. One of my friends was admitted in one of the best hospitals in the country. And, they were saying they have never suffered such a horrific psychological trauma ever.
Because of being in the hospital.
Because of being in the hospital. There's absolutely, it's called an isolation place, but there's no privacy. The three guys opposite you, the Lord takes them away, and they change everything right before your eyes. No privacy, no isolation, no nothing. So even if you had a fighting spirit, truly, you wouldn't fight. And also, the hoarding of resources. I reached out to the committee the very first, months, and I told them, can you guys decentralize this issue? Really, you can't expect somebody from Moyale to come and do their results in Lancet or KEMRI or whatever it is. Are you able to take the 47 counties, whether the CECs or the doctors, and train them and also devolve resources? But they didn't even do that.
But even so, and there's something you've raised, because if KEMRI, and we have the CDC here, KEMRI, you said, has been used even as far as treatment options for Ebola before. And for the longest time, our masks were ridiculously expensive.
Absolutely.
Testing was incredibly expensive. It was like 13,000, upward of 15,000 shillings for someone to get tested for COVID.
Yes.
Yet Senegal is here with a $1 testing kit. Who's dropped the ball? What went wrong where? Because we can't be this sort of developed economic hub, and yet we can't provide affordable testing for our people.
Well, I always say that the government is not stupid. They are not foolish. They do what they do for the interest of whoever it is who's the piper. But the truth of the fact is that we have a business. We have a government that is a business unit for some people. Jack Ma came and donated testing kits. Those testing kits were diverted and sold. And also we were told that the government would shield and take all the costs of all patients. But now even the health CS came the other day and said, look, for you to be tested for free, you still need to pay 1,000 shillings still. But even that is not available. Why? Because a lot of the testing kits have been diverted to private hospitals and to other labs. That is absolutely that the least you should pay is 8,000 shillings. So we see that they've used this pandemic as a business-making venture to raise funds. At the end of the day, they suspended, of course, any advantage through NHIF and all that. So the truth of the fact is that, and we must be very realistic, and we must be honest with ourselves, that it is accurate to say that the government has used COVID as a business venture. And it's absolutely unfortunate. And I pray, and the other day I was asking somebody, with all this money that they've received, You see World Bank approved almost a lot of money, plus what is on the budget, plus all the supplementary budgets, going all the way to supplementary budgets 3, before the present budget was read. All of it in response to COVID. Yet we haven't seen anything on the ground whatsoever.
Wow.
So they have used a pandemic to take care of their own interest and to ensure that they actually reap funds based on this. And so you might ask yourself as a common Kenyan, what is my recourse? Your recourse is to change this government. There's no other thing. If they don't care the very fact whether you sneeze and die, why would you have such people in governance?
Well, let's get to politics a little later. But before we go on break, there now kuna fununu that now President Uhuru Kenyatta might have to reimpose the lockdown. Our numbers are increasingly getting higher by the day. I think we're at a point now where sort of every Kenyan knows someone who's been affected. Either they're in hospital or, someone has passed away. That's kind of how close this thing is to us right now. What's your take on that? Should we even have reopened in the first place? Should we get back to, a serious lockdown?
Well, the truth of the fact is that the government put measures for a number of months and protocols in place. The numbers never went down. So what exactly happened? I mean, if you impose another lockdown, will that help if it didn't help before? No.
Yeah.
So lockdown is indeed not a solution at all. And also, if we look at the psychological and the financial implications of a lockdown itself, they are way more expensive than even the disease. Because we are aware now that, 95% of those who get infected to 98% will get better naturally, as long as they're not within the risk category. So I think the thing is, identifying how to navigate our lives through this pandemic. But you might want to ask a very serious questions. Is that why is Kenya exhibiting the highest numbers in East, Central, and West Africa? Yet our neighbors here, Tanzania, they've opened their schools. They've declared the country is COVID-free.
But I mean, can we really trust those numbers too?
Well, yeah, I mean, it's evident. I have called my friends in Tanzania. They have no confessions of COVID whatsoever.
So what's your theory then?
So my theory is that I strongly suspect these numbers. I mean, everybody has been suspecting these. Our numbers. I honestly don't think these numbers are accurate.
Are you serious, Dennis?
I am very serious. I honestly suspect that these numbers may not be accurate numbers.
What would be the point of doing that, though?
Well, many reasons, actually, because we've seen that during this pandemic, they've used it for political expediency. They've used it to receive donor funding. They've used it for very many reasons other than the very due advantage that is there for the people. Kenyans moved on a long time ago. That's the truth of the fact. They can't stay locked up in their houses. They don't have jobs. They need to go and create new livelihoods. I think the place that we are right now is to learn how do we navigate through this minefield, the same way we navigated through terrorism, the same way we navigated through other diseases that we've combated as people.
All right.
But we must put the government in check and really and very strongly query these numbers. We're not saying that there's no COVID.
Okay.
And even the very statement that you made that we know somebody who is unaware, but we know them much more through the media other than one-to-one. And we're not saying that there's no COVID.
Okay.
But at least every Kenyan right now is struggling to understand.
All right.
Is this the truth or is this not the truth? And
well,
I think
let's take a break.
Let's
take a break with that. Very interesting perspectives there. I wonder how many of you would agree with him. 22999 is the SMS line, and also on Facebook at Switch TV Kenya. When we come back, we still have a lot to discuss, including politics. He said the way for us to sort of deal with things is through our leadership, which means I guess politics does need to factor in sometime between now and 2022 quite heavily. We're going to be having that discussion coming up next. Stay tuned. All right, guys, welcome back to Full Circle with Joyce. I'm here with Dennis Nthumbi, of course, who's a political risk advisor, as we're going through events of the week in brief. Stepping away just a little bit from COVID now, there seems to be quite a lot of pressure to dissolve the KIRINYAGA County government. KIRINYAGA members of County Assembly have set the stage for a renewed battle with the county executive after they began collecting signatures to dissolve the Governor Anne Waiguru-led administration. Led by Majority Leader Kamau Murango, the MCAs will be collecting over 60,000 signatures against the required 30,000 to dissolve the executive. So, Dennis, considering how the first parliamentary proceedings went, or the Senate committee hearings as well went, do you think they have a chance at this? Because she seems to have some friends in some high places too. As I mean, in light of ODM even coming to really support her.
I think what it is that we have been praising as BBI and the handshake may be collapsing very soon.
Is it?
Because it may not be workable or feasible to the ODM side, and we'll see it. We'll see a light.
Why wouldn't it be right now?
I mean, because they're pushing to sort of create a government of national unity, sort of what Kibaki and Raila had. But it's one of the case studies that is a bad example of governance in the country, because it never worked, it never delivered much. If you ask what did the coalition government deliver, what you'll say is maybe a hard legacy of Thika Road and nothing much from that. The reason is because it did not resolve the traditional issues that were tabled in the Waki reports, the Ndongo Land report, the Kligra report. It did not resolve the traditional issues that it sought to unify, to resolve. So if it didn't then medicate that, then what was the use of having a unity government? A government of national unity, or a coalition government of national unity? Then the only thing it resolved was gratify the the desire for ultimate power for a few individuals.
But the way in which that coalition government obviously came together, and the way that the BBI sort of has had its, pomp and circumstance in the lead up to it, is also very different.
No, it's alike. Remember that the reason why the president shook hands with Raila Odinga was actually to unify the country.
But not as it wasn't the same things were not at stake.
Well, there was violence in 2017. Actually,
tremendous violence.
A section and a segment of the country didn't vote. There was absolutely resistance. So to medicate that, a handshake came into play. From the handshake, then BBI came through as a peace document initially, as a document that was stated to resolve the power imbalance at the executive level, not anything else.
Okay.
But so it is still as per the same light that the government of national unity came into play. It was under the same circumstances that the government of national unity sought to resolve within the Kibaki and Raila regime, that we are still seeing playing through.
But would really ODM and Honorable Raila Odinga really kind of just let this kind of fizzle out and lose steam? The BBI process, and even President Uhuru Kenyatta, because he's obviously also sacrificed quite a lot because of that handshake, as far as some of his other relations. Would they really kind of just let this fizzle out?
I think for me, the BBI document essentially is a selfish document that is meant to resolve greed within a few individuals. And of course they stay in power. The very fact that our Constitution 2010 expires power, the much you can do is run a second term, that's 10 years. After that, then you have to hand over the baton to somebody else. And a lot of these political families, or whatever it is, that they hate that because they have much to lose anyway. But what I'm saying is that the coalition government was not a success, because the reason why we put it in place was to resolve traditional issues. It didn't resolve.
So let's tie that then to Anne Waiguru now.
So now, the reason why I'm saying, Anne Waiguru may not get protection from ODM is because the handshake is set to collapse. And we know that as a governor, if you're accused of being corrupt, all you needed to do was visit a dry cleaner up Upper Hill called Baba, and make sure that you know, you're completely sanitized, and support BBI. It's the truth of the Kenyan politics, whether we like it or not. So they thought that they will put the Waiguru committee. I always call it like the baby shower committee. And I know Senate is an honorable house, but it's one of the most dishonorable houses I have seen right now, because they haven't perpetuated democracy. They have indeed sat as a house that has offered sanitization for some of our politicians, who then are known to have politically correct motives, you know, thereabout. And you know, we know that, you know, if it was possibly another governor who has decided to support Dr. William Ruto, they would have been punished viciously. In fact, they wouldn't be sitting there. But today, as a governor, all you need to know is that even if I'm corrupt like how, then what I need to do is I just need to be politically correct. But thank God for an institute assembly like the KIRINYAGA County Assembly. And that's why, for me, I'm a very firm believer of devolution. I'm a very firm believer of the office of the MC. I'm a very firm believer of breaking up further the centralization of power, from making the governor look like a mini president or a mini king or a mini god, to ensuring that we break the centralization of power from the governor's office all the way to the ward level, set up a ward fund, set up an oversight team from the ward, that at the ward level you can decide whether it's a toilet you need, or it's a road you need, or you need to put up a proper school or a proper police station, or you need to help the churches. And I believe that you know, suspending or dissolving the county assembly will be a good move democratically, because it will stop the corrupt reign of one Governor Waiguru, and it will teach a lesson to a few others.
So you have very strong sentiments as far as that county is concerned.
Absolutely. It needs to be an example that indeed there's self-governance of the people, that people can make decisions. And you know,
I want us to move on so very quickly.
But it's crazy that you'd want to impose rulership on people when people have really said that get out of office. I think the honorable thing that Governor Waiguru would do is resign voluntarily, because the people of KIRINYAGA do not desire that you be in office further.
Interesting. Let's turn our focus then to Western Kenya. And of course, first of all, we've seen Musalia Mudavadi and Moses Wetangula seeking now divine intervention. They were accompanied by a host of Luhya MPs to the 2022 consultative meeting, and the search for the ever-elusive Luhya unity ahead of the 2022 equation is still on. I wonder what we're going to say, or what sort of move they kind of need to take really to, you know, to really be able to put in a good bump as far as 2022 is concerned. But also the Mulembe Nation, you know, continuing to prepare itself. We have a group being led by Devolution CS Eugene Wamalwa and Kakamega Governor Wycliffe Oparanya rallying behind President Uhuru Kenyatta's agenda. And then second ANC party leader Musalia Mudavadi and Ford Kenya's Moses Wetangula. And third, we have Didmas Barasa, MP Didmas Barasa, and former Senator Boni Halwale, who are also rallying behind Deputy President William Ruto. So we seem to be in quite the mix here. What's your take on what's happening as far as Moses Wetangula, Musalia Mudavadi, and the 2022 election bill?
I think there's an opportunity that the Mulembe Nation really would want to introspect very carefully and ask themselves, you know, whether they've been taken for a ride for a long time. Politics is about interests, and all politics is local. If your interest at the ground level is not being satisfied, then you need to change your course. You need to change your leadership.
But can I ask you this? Because isn't that part of our problem as a country? The fact that we're even calling it Mulembe Nation, it's basically saying it's their turn to eat.
Well, no. I mean, I've said politics is about local interests. I mean, the reason why you have representation, you know, our politics works as though it's a society, it's a cooperative movement, is where 10 families join and they form a ward, and that ward presents an MCA. The MCA goes to the county assembly to negotiate for the interests of that community. So there's nothing wrong with them calling themselves Mulembe Nation.
Okay.
The truth of the fact is that they need to interrogate whether the route they've pursued consistently has delivered for them.
Gotcha.
Look at it. The sugar economy is dead, dead, buried.
Your final comments,
you know,
as we wrap up.
So I think, you know, my final comments will be very simple. This is the time that Wanjiku or the Kenyan needs really to think for themselves. They really need to understand and know their civic role and the fact that they are not empty-handed. You have the Constitution 2010. Most importantly, you have God. You have authority that has been accorded to you that you must exercise now. You don't even need to wait for 2022 to exercise that authority.
Okay. Yes. All right. Well, Kenyans, rise up. We need to
have
our voices heard. Thank you very much, Dennis, for coming on to the show. We hope to see you again soon.
Please. I'll go to the mountain again and petition to be allowed to come to the show.
Thank you. Coming up next, we're going to have our segment now with Elimika Youth Program. Stay tuned for that. We'll be back after this.